As the war in Europe moves into a second year, economic realities make it difficult for the United States to maintain its neutrality.
Wilson, the first year of the war, barred all private loans to any warring nation. Well, by 1915, all warring nations are running out of cash to buy goods here. If they stop buying American goods, the country will be plunged into recession. So he lifts that ban, but he can't tell banks where to lend the money.
If you look at the trade statistics, we had a lot of trade with the British and very little with the Germans. The British Navy had their blockade around Germany and prevented the Germans from replenishing their consumer goods. The Americans were party to that because we were trading with Britain, but had cut back trade with the Germans. The odds were greatly against Germany winning this war of attrition. The Americans were miffed at times with the British, violating international commercial law, boarding their ships and taking these goods off. There was a flurry in 1916 when we thought we might go to war against England if they didn't stop. The British even at one point were putting American flags on their ships so the Germans wouldn't sink.
Unable to challenge British superiority on the ocean's surface, the Germans turned to an alternative strategy: submarine warfare.
Starting in 1915, the Germans began using their submarines to sink ships headed for Great Britain. And when they used their submarines to sink these ships, they did so without a specific warning. What the Germans did was said that the entire zone surrounding Great Britain was banned to shipping, including neutral shipping. And they used this new weapon of the submarine to torpedo ships coming into that zone. The Germans argued that their submarines couldn't surface because then they'd be sitting ducks for the British destroyers.
President Woodrow Wilson, who had a grand idea for liberal internationalism in which the nations of the world would all cooperate, based that vision on the rule of law, on international law. And if a nation like Germany could just take shots at innocent tourists, as he characterized them, then the whole rule of international law could crumble. So you had a progressive tension between the United States and Germany. 1915, especially sinking of the Lusitania.
With the loss of over 1,000 lives and over 100 American lives on that ship. Now, the ship happened to be carrying munitions to Great Britain. That came out after the war, but it was a great shock to Americans, as you can imagine, that some 128 Americans were killed on this ship, and these were innocent civilians. Wilson was outraged by it. He demanded that the Germans stop doing it, which they did. Interestingly enough, his Secretary of State, William Jennings Bryan, resigned over Wilson's protest regarding the Lusitania. William Jennings Bryan said that what Wilson was doing was going to get the United States into the war, that the United States had to have a more modern view of neutrality, and that instead of pushing for the full rights of neutrals, what the United States needed to do in these circumstances was warn its citizens to stay out of harm's way.
Despite the president's confrontational stance, he is a long way from committing the United States to war. One obstacle, certainly, is the battle he faces for re-election in 1916.
One of the things Wilson said, there's such a thing as a nation being too proud to fight. And what he meant by that was that the United States would uphold its moral values. It would also uphold neutrality. It wouldn't be rushed into a war. Now, when I say it wouldn't be rushed into a war, that means that there were Americans who wanted the United States to enter the war very soon and on the side of the Allies. Leading that group was Wilson's old rival, Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt hated Wilson. Roosevelt thought Wilson was a hypocrite. He thought Wilson was really a coward. And he, from the very beginning, or at least the fall of 1914, was urging the United States to take a stand with the Allies. That was a distinctly minority position. You see this in the election of 1916, when Wilson ran for re-election against Charles Evans Hughes, the Republican candidate, and Hughes took a somewhat more pro-Allied position than Wilson did. And Wilson's campaign manager developed a slogan which eventually carried the day for Wilson. That slogan was, "He kept us out of war." And Wilson was elected by the narrowest possible of margins. He didn't know till the morning after Election Day that he was going to be reelected. The irony, of course, is that election was in November 1916, and in April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany.